Hello, welcome to this game review. We'll have a look at a game in which White got to take the whole center, but later didn't really know what to do. And later White won a piece, but didn't solve the problem of how to keep the piece. And at the end he lost a winning rook endgame on time, because this is a 10+0 game, so we don't have increment. So inevitably most of the time there will be some strange time scramble at the end, which isn't really related to chess. So in general I would suggest firstly playing with longer time controls, preferably 15+10 or even longer. But okay, let's take a look. So out of the opening we got this position, and Black is clearly a lot worse. He put his pieces on bad squares, White took the center, his bishop is maybe misplaced, should probably be somewhere else, but it's fine. And here White has two very good moves, which are both related to the same theme. The knight on g6 and b6 are both unstable, and they're both asking for the h or a pawn to arrive. So for example, a4 would be very annoying because now we're threatening a5. This simultaneously gains space and also gains time. This knight doesn't really have anywhere to go. c4 is not stable. And if a5, now this b5 square has been weakened, and potentially this pawn on a5 might also be weak, and this knight is still badly placed. Similarly, White can do the same thing on the other side, h4. This threatens h5. For example, if castles h5, now this knight has to go to h8, which is really not ideal, and White can even put his pawn on h6. If Black takes, his king will be very weak, and if he plays g6, this pawn will be very annoying, and also this knight is dead. So this is a nice idea to know with knights on these squares. H and A pawns really like to attack these knights. Instead White plays a3, which is kind of a waste of time and a waste of move. If we don't play these moves, then let's at least develop pieces like queen e2, maybe rook d1, bishop e3, something like this. But okay, a3 happens. Black finishes his scheme of development, castles. Now bishop e3, developing the bishop, which is fine. But after knight c4, our bishop is attacked and the pawn is attacked. And this is the first kind of problem that White has to solve. How to not allow Black to take the bishop or the pawn. And the simple answer is bishop c1. This is of course not very aesthetic, but White should retreat, play b3, and then put his bishop on e3 or even b2. Because now after b3, Black gets the bishop there, and in general it's important to understand that generally bishops are better than knights, unless we have some reason to suspect otherwise. So we shouldn't give up bishops for no reason. But okay, now c6, White plays d5, but this is not a very good move because it allows Black to open the c file and close the other files. Instead White should have played e5, establishing a pawn in the center on e5, and then maybe knight e4 next. Again, this idea of h4, h5 to attack the king side should be kept in mind. But here Black should have played cd, ed, and e5, and now this pawn on d5 really obstructs White's play. The pieces can go to the square, this rook can go to the c file, and Black can also play on the king side. Okay, ed, ed. Black takes here, which is also a big mistake, because now White gets this very nice square for his pieces, and he should have put his knight on d5, maybe put his pawn on c4 to defend the square, and he can also attack this weakness on d6. Okay, queen d5, a few moves pass, now queen b4 was played, but here Black has a nice tactic based on this loose knight on c3, starting with bishop f3. White can recapture with both things, for example here, now a5, now trying to undefend the knight on c3, and after this, rook c8, and this knight is pinned, and it's not possible to defend it, so Black will win a piece. Of course this is not obvious at all, but we should be kept in mind that when we gave up the dark squared bishop, our dark squares are quite weak. Okay, queen b4, rook b8, very passive. Now White develops his last piece, and now he is better again. After knight e5, Black simply blunders a piece due to the spin, which White understands, and here he took the piece. And this is very good. Black cannot take because the queen is hanging, so now white is completely winning, but he has to solve some small problems. So firstly a5, but now white has a couple of choices. Either take this pawn, probably with the rook most simply, or take this pawn. But for some reason white didn't take either pawn, and now after queen c7 both the knight and the rook are attacked. But this problem can still be solved in a variety of ways, the most active of which is to move the knight with tempo, and then we can move the rook somewhere. Or more simply is to just defend the knight like this. Okay, rook d5 happens, and now the game continues because black gets his knight, so the problem was not solved. Now we get some exchanges, and a few moves later we got this rook endgame. Firstly here black could have basically checkmated like this, queen h1 and rook e8, and it's likely that this rook will drop. The point being the king cannot now go here because this is hanging, and after this the king has to defend the rook, and now we can't play rook d8, but we can play queen f3. This attacks this pawn, attacks this check, and this pawn, and white is in big trouble. But okay, rook c2 happens. A few moves later we get a rook endgame, and this rook endgame should be a lot better for white because he has a pawn advantage, he has an extra active rook, and his king is more active. So rook b1, and now white finds this move rook b4, after which this pawn drops, and white will have two connected passed pawns, which should win the game automatically. But I assume there was a lot of time trouble here, which is why white played quite poorly. So king f6. Firstly, white should just take this pawn and promote the a and b pawns. He doesn't even need the king for this. Instead, some strange stuff happened. g4. Again, there's no reason for these kind of moves. White has two connected passed pawns, he should just get them rolling. Firstly by playing a5 and then play b4, so rook b5. If this check happens, white can do anything he wants, there isn't really doing anything. So a5, b4, rook b6, then a6, b5, and etc. And the pawns should promote. But instead, a few moves later, the position was even equalized as black's king got active. White didn't do anything with his pawns, and after this check and f5, now white will likely lose this pawn, and matters are not as clear. White is still winning, but there will be precision required. But here the position is already about equal, as black will have counterplay with this pawn. But at this point white lost on time. And the thing I would suggest is don't play without increment, because then we won't be able to play a full normal game of chess.